I was standing on the ridge overlooking my 200 acres of Montana ranch land when I first noticed the survey stakes driven into my property. And that's when I knew the Willow Creek HOA was about to ruin my life again. The morning had started normal enough. I'd been up since 5, feeding the cattle and checking fence lines like I'd done every day for the past 15 years since buying this place. My name is Yates Yardley, and I'd worked my entire adult life to afford this ranch outside of Bozeman. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Or at least, it used to be just mine before the county approved that God-forsaken subdivision 3 miles down the road. The Willow Creek Estates development had gone up 5 years ago, a collection of overpriced McMansions where rich folks from California could pretend they were living the Montana dream without actually dealing with any of the realities of rural life. The whole development was governed by one of those iron-fisted homeowner associations that seemed to think their rules extended beyond their own property lines. I'd had run-ins with them before, over silly things like my truck being too loud when I drove past their entrance, or my cattle allegedly getting too close to their precious fence line, even though my fence had been there 20 years before they showed up. But survey stakes on my property? That was a new level of audacity. I walked the line of orange-topped stakes, counting them. 47 stakes running in a perfectly straight line from the eastern edge of my property, cutting right through my best grazing pasture and heading toward the western boundary. Each one had a number spray painted on it, and some had pink ribbons tied around them. I pulled out my phone and called my neighbor, Pete Davidson, who ran the ranch adjacent to mine. Pete was in his 60s, had been ranching in Montana his whole life, and knew every dirty trick developers and HOAs tried to pull. "Pete, you got survey stakes on your property?" I asked when he picked up. "Matter of fact, I do," Pete said, and I could hear the anger in his voice. "Found them yesterday. Was planning to call you this morning. You got them too?" 47 of them cutting straight through my east pasture. "Same here, running right through my south 40. I made some calls. Yates, you're not going to believe this. That HOA down at Willow Creek got approval to run a natural gas pipeline." "Through our property? How the hell did they manage that?" "Eminent domain. They convinced the county that it was for public utility. Said they needed to connect to the main gas line that runs along Highway 191, and the shortest route cuts right through our ranches." I felt my jaw clench. Public utility? It's for their private subdivision. That's what I said. But apparently they got some lawyer who knew how to word things, and the county commission approved it. We should have gotten notice. But somehow the paperwork got lost in the mail. I could hear Pete making air quotes with his voice. "When are they planning to start construction?" "Next week, from what I heard." I thanked Pete and hung up, staring at those orange stakes. This was my land. I'd bought it, paid for it, paid taxes on it for 15 years. And now some HOA was going to dig up my pasture to run gas to their overpriced houses? The next morning, I drove into town and went straight to the county clerk's office. A pleasant woman named Margaret worked the front desk, and she helped me pull the files on the pipeline approval. Sure enough, there it was, a permit issued to Willow Creek Estates Homeowner Association for the installation of a natural gas pipeline, with the route clearly marked on the survey map cutting through both my property and Pete's. "When were the property owners notified?" I asked Margaret. She flipped through the papers. "Says here notices were sent certified mail on March 15th. "I never got any notice." Margaret looked sympathetic. "You can file a complaint, but once the permit is issued and the notification period has passed, there's not much that can be done. The project is approved." "This is my land. How can they just take it?" "Eminent domain for public utilities. The gas company that's installing it has those rights. I'm sorry, Mr. Yardley." I left the clerk's office feeling like I'd been gut-punched. Back at the ranch, I called my lawyer, David Chen, who I'd used for the property purchase in various ranch business over the years. David listened to my explanation and asked me to scan and email him all the documents. 3 days later, David called me back. "Yates, I'm not going to lie to you. This is bad. They followed the letter of the law, even if it's a dirty way to do it. The HOA created a subsidiary utility company, filed for the easement rights, and got approval. The fact that you didn't receive notice is problematic, but proving that is difficult, and even if you could prove it, The best-case scenario is delaying construction for a few months while they refile. So I'm just supposed to let them tear up my ranch? They have to compensate you for the easement. Did you receive any compensation offer? Not a damn thing. Then we have grounds to fight on that front. They can't take the easement without fair compensation. Let me file an injunction to stop construction until the compensation issue is resolved. It was something, but it felt like putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. 2 days later, on a Thursday morning, I was out checking the fence line when I saw the trucks. 3 heavy construction vehicles, a surveying crew, and a white Lexus SUV that I recognized immediately. That SUV belonged to Sharon Hendricks, the president of the Willow Creek HOA, and the biggest pain in my neck since the subdivision had been built. I drove my truck down to where they were setting up, parking it right in front of their equipment. A man in a hard hat walked over, looking annoyed. "Sir, you need to move your vehicle. We have permission to be here." "This is my property, and I haven't been compensated for any easement. You're not doing anything until I hear from my lawyer." The hard hat guy pulled out his phone, made a call, and a few minutes later, Sharon Hendricks came strutting over in her designer jeans and quilted vest that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 3 months. Sharon was in her late 40s, had that aggressive blonde bob haircut that seemed to be required for HOA presidents, and the kind of permanently irritated expression that suggested she'd been asking to speak to managers her entire life. "Mr. Yardley," she said in that condescending tone she always used, "I understand you're upset, but this pipeline is happening. The county has approved it, and we have every legal right to proceed. You never compensated me for the easement. The compensation offer was included in the certified letter that was sent to you. If you failed to receive it or respond to it, that's not our problem. The legal notification period is passed." "I never got any letter." Sharon's smile was sharp and fake. "Again, not our problem. Now please move your vehicle, or I'll have to call the sheriff's department." "Call them. I'd love to explain how you're stealing my land." Sharon's eyes narrowed, and she pulled out her phone. 10 minutes later, a deputy sheriff pulled up. His name was Rodriguez, and I'd met him a few times at community events. He looked uncomfortable as Sharon immediately started talking at him. "Deputy, this man is blocking legal construction on a county-approved project. I need him removed from the site." Rodriguez looked at me. "Yates, what's going on?" I explained the situation, about the lack of notice, the missing compensation, and the injunction my lawyer was filing. Rodriguez listened and then shook his head. "This is a civil matter, not a criminal one. Madam, if he says he's filing legal paperwork to stop construction, you should probably hold off until that's resolved. Sir, if they have the proper permits, you can't stop them indefinitely. You two need to work this out with lawyers, not out here." Sharon looked furious, but Rodriguez wasn't budging. After some more back and forth, the construction crew packed up for the day. Sharon gave me a look that could have melted steel. "This is just delaying the inevitable," she said. "That pipeline is going through, and every day you delay it, you're keeping 43 families from having heat. I hope you can live with that." Those 43 families knew what they were buying into. Not my problem they built houses without confirming their utilities first. Sharon stomped back to her Lexus and drove off in a cloud of dust. My lawyer David filed the injunction that afternoon, and 2 days later we had a hearing in county court. The judge was an older man named Patterson who'd been on the bench for 20 years. Both sides presented their arguments. My lawyer focused on the lack of proper compensation and questionable notification. The HOA's lawyer, a slick guy from a Billings firm, argued that all proper procedures had been followed and any delay would cause undue hardship to the homeowners. Judge Patterson listened to everything and then made his ruling. "I'm granting a temporary 30-day injunction on construction. During that time, the parties will work out fair compensation for the easement. If compensation can be agreed upon, construction may proceed. If not, we'll reconvene, and I'll make a determination on fair market value for the easement." Court adjourned. It was a small victory, but it bought me time. Over the next 2 weeks, I had 3 meetings with the HOA's representatives about compensation. They offered me $15,000 for the easement across my property. My land surveyor estimated the easement would devalue my property by at least $50,000. Considering the disruption to the pasture, the permanent access requirements, and the potential liability of having a gas pipeline running through my ranch. I countered with $75,000. They laughed at me. The negotiations went nowhere. Sharon personally showed up at the third meeting. "Mr. Yardley, you're being unreasonable. $15,000 is more than fair for a simple easement. You're putting a gas pipeline through my best grazing land. $15,000 doesn't even cover 1 year of lost productivity. The pipeline will be underground. You can still graze cattle over it. Not during construction and not during any maintenance. Plus, having a gas pipeline on my property is a liability nightmare." Sharon leaned forward. "Let me be very clear. One way or another, that pipeline is going in. You can accept reasonable compensation and make this easy, or you can fight it and end up with whatever the judge orders, which might be even less. Your choice." I stood up. "Then I guess we'll see what the judge says." The 30 days came and went, and we ended up back in court. Judge Patterson heard arguments from both sides about fair compensation. In the end, he ordered the HOA to pay me $35,000 for the easement, which was better than $15,000, but still less than what I thought was fair. He gave the same ruling for Pete's property. "Construction may proceed once compensation is paid," Judge Patterson said. "Mr. Yardley, I understand your frustration, but the law allows for these easements when they serve a public utility purpose. My hands are tied on stopping the pipeline, but I can ensure you're fairly compensated." I left the courthouse feeling defeated. David tried to be encouraging. $35,000 is actually pretty good for an easement case like this. We could appeal, but honestly, I don't think you'd get much more. "It's not about the money, David. It's the principle. This is my land." "I know. I'm sorry." The check arrived a week later, and the construction crews showed up the next day. I watched from my porch as they started tearing up my pasture, digging a trench 4 feet deep and 3 feet wide, running in a straight line across my property. The noise was constant, the dust was everywhere, and my cattle were agitated by all the activity. Pete called me that afternoon. "They started on your place too?" "Yeah, it's a nightmare." "I did some research on this pipeline," Pete said. "Guess what? It's not connected to any municipal gas system. It's a private line running from the main pipeline on Highway 191 directly to the Willow Creek subdivision. They played the county, calling it a public utility, but it's 100% for those HOA houses. Can we use that to fight it?" I asked my lawyer. She says since the permit is already approved and construction has started, getting it reversed now would be almost impossible. We'd need to prove fraud, and that's a high bar. I thanked Pete and hung up, watching the construction crews work. An idea was forming in my mind, something wild and probably stupid, but I was angry enough not to care. Over the next 3 weeks, the pipeline installation continued. They laid massive sections of pipe in the trench, welded them together, and slowly buried them. The construction supervisor, a decent enough guy named Tom, explained that it was a 12-inch diameter high-pressure natural gas line that would feed the entire subdivision. They installed pressure regulators, shut-off valves, and monitoring equipment at various points. "This is a serious piece of infrastructure," Tom said one day when I brought him and his crew some coffee. Despite my anger at the situation, I didn't have beef with the workers who were just doing their job. Once it's operational, it'll provide gas for heating, hot water, and cooking for all 43 homes in Willow Creek. "Must be expensive to install," I said casually. "Oh yeah, project budget is over $2 million. That's why the HOA was pushing so hard to get it done. They've been running on expensive propane tanks for 5 years, and this will cut their heating costs by like 60%. $2 million, and they'd fought me over paying fair compensation for tearing up my land. The pipeline installation was completed in early November, just as Montana's winter was starting to show its teeth. They did final inspections, hooked everything up, and on a Friday afternoon, they activated the line. I watched from my truck as Sharon Hendricks herself showed up for a little ceremony at the main valve station they'd installed near the highway. She gave a speech about progress and community, cut a ribbon, and someone turned a big red wheel. The gas started flowing. That night, temperatures dropped to 15 degrees. I sat in my warm ranch house, heated by my own propane system, and thought about that pipeline running under my pasture, keeping all those Willow Creek houses warm and cozy. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. They'd used legal tricks to force this pipeline onto my property, paid me less than it was worth, disrupted my ranch, and now they were benefiting from it while I was left with torn-up pasture land and a permanent easement restriction. Sharon's condescending attitude played in my head on repeat. Not our problem. Around midnight, I made a decision that was probably going to get me in trouble, but I didn't care anymore. The pipeline route through my property was about 800 feet long. There were 2 access points on my land, one near the eastern fence line where the pipe entered my property, and one in the middle of the pasture where they'd installed a pressure monitoring station and an emergency shut-off valve. Both were now officially part of the easement, meaning technically the utility company had legal access to them, but they were still on my land. On Saturday morning, I drove out to the monitoring station. It was a small concrete pad with a metal box containing gauges and valves, surrounded by a chain-link fence with a locked gate. The fence was 6 feet high, probably to keep cattle away from it. A sign on the fence said, "Warning, natural gas pipeline equipment, authorized personnel only." I had wire cutters in my truck. The lock on the gate was a standard master padlock. I cut the lock off, went inside, and looked at the equipment. Tom, the construction supervisor, had explained some of it to me during installation. The large valve was the emergency shut-off. The gauges showed pressure readings. There was also a smaller valve that appeared to be some kind of bleed-off or pressure release. I took photos of everything with my phone, documenting the current state. Then I grabbed the emergency shut-off valve and started turning it. The wheel was stiff, but it moved. I turned it clockwise, counting the rotations. After about 30 full turns, it stopped. The valve was closed. I checked the pressure gauge. It was still showing pressure on my side of the valve, but nothing would be flowing through to the subdivision now. I'd effectively capped their pipeline. I left everything else alone, took more photos, and drove back to my house. If anyone asked, I'd say I was inspecting equipment on my property and noticed the valve was in an unsafe position, so I adjusted it. Not my fault if that happened to cut off gas to the subdivision. Saturday afternoon came and went with no phone calls. Saturday night was colder, dropping to 10 degrees. Sunday morning was brutally cold, near 0 degrees. My phone rang at 8 in the morning. It was Pete. "Yates, did you hear? The whole Willow Creek subdivision lost gas last night. They're saying there's a problem with the pipeline." I tried to sound surprised. "Really? That's unfortunate. Sharon Hendricks is apparently losing her mind. She's calling everyone, demanding emergency repairs." "Well, it's Sunday. Not much anyone can do today." Pete laughed. "You sound mighty calm about this." "Not my pipeline, Pete. Not my problem." I spent Sunday doing normal ranch chores, enjoying the quiet of my property now that construction was finished. Around noon, I saw a utility truck drive past on the road, heading toward the monitoring station on my land. I got in my truck and followed at a distance. 2 technicians were at the monitoring station, looking confused. One was on his phone. I drove up and got out. "Something wrong, gentlemen?" The older technician nodded. "Yeah, we've got no gas flow to the subdivision. Looks like this emergency valve got closed somehow. We're going to open it back up." "Is that safe?" I asked innocently. "I mean, if an emergency valve closed, shouldn't someone figure out why before opening it again?" The technician paused. "Well, there's no indication of a leak or any safety issue. Probably just got closed accidentally during final inspection." "Accidentally? This is a brand new pipeline. Seems like that would be noticed." The younger technician was already reaching for the valve. "Sir, we need to restore service. There are 43 families without heat and it's below 0. "Those families knew what they were getting into with new construction," I said, echoing what I'd told Sharon. "Besides, this is my property. Do you have permission to be here?" The older technician pulled out a paper. "We have easement rights for maintenance and emergency repairs." "Let me see that." I took the paper and read it slowly. It was a standard utility access document. "This says you need to provide 24 hours notice to the property owner before accessing the site, except in cases of confirmed emergency." "Have you confirmed there's an emergency?" "The subdivision has no heat. That's an emergency." "I mean, have you confirmed there's a gas leak or safety issue? Because if the valve is just closed, that's not an emergency. That's a service interruption. Different things according to this document. The technicians looked at each other. The older one got back on his phone, calling someone. After a long conversation, he hung up and looked at me. Our supervisor is contacting the HOA. They're going to reach out to you about access permission. My phone's working. I'll wait for their call. The technicians left, and I went back to my house. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Sharon Hendricks, and she was furious. "Mr. Yardley, you need to allow the utility workers access to fix the pipeline immediately." "Hello, Sharon. Nice to hear from you too. This isn't a joke. There are families with children who have no heat. I'm sure they have space heaters or something. It's only been one day. You're deliberately blocking emergency repairs." "I'm not blocking anything. I simply informed the technicians that according to the easement agreement, they need to provide proper notice for non-emergency access. If there's a confirmed emergency, that's different. People not having heat in winter is an emergency." "Is there a gas leak?" "What?" "No, the valve is just closed." "Then it's not a safety emergency. It's a service interruption. I'm sure it can be addressed during normal business hours with proper notice." Sharon was sputtering. "You closed that valve. I know you did." "That's a serious accusation. Do you have any proof?" "Who else would have done it?" "I don't know." "Sharon, maybe your utility company didn't secure the site properly. Maybe vandals. Maybe cattle rubbed against it. Not my job to figure that out. If you don't allow access immediately, I'm calling the sheriff." "You do that. Make sure you bring a copy of the easement agreement because I'm following it to the letter. You wanted this legal and official, so let's keep it legal and official." Sharon hung up on me. 20 minutes later, Deputy Rodriguez showed up at my door. He looked tired. "Yates, I really don't want to be in the middle of this." "Then don't be. I'm not doing anything illegal. The HOA says you're blocking utility access. I'm requiring them to follow the terms of the easement agreement they forced on me. It says they need to give 24 hours notice for non-emergency access. They didn't. I'm happy to grant access tomorrow afternoon with proper written notice." Rodriguez rubbed his face. "There are people without heat. And that's unfortunate. But if I don't enforce the terms of this easement, it sets a precedent that they can come onto my property whenever they want without any notice. This easement has already cost me plenty. I'm not giving up more rights than I legally have to." "Did you close that valve?" "Deputy, I inspect equipment on my property regularly. If I saw a valve in what appeared to be an unsafe position, I would adjust it. That's being a responsible landowner." Rodriguez stared at me for a long moment. "This is petty, Yates." "No, what's petty is fighting me over fair compensation and then expecting me to bend over backwards to help when there's a problem. They wanted to play hardball with me. Now they're getting the same treatment." Rodriguez left without citing me for anything because I wasn't actually breaking any laws. The easement agreement clearly stated the notice requirements, and I was entitled to enforce them. Sunday night was the coldest of the season, dropping to 5 below zero. My phone rang multiple times, but I let them all go to voicemail. Monday morning, I had 17 voicemail messages, most from Sharon, a few from other HOA board members, and one from an attorney threatening legal action. I called my lawyer, David, and explained the situation. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Yates, tell me you didn't actually close that valve." "I'm not saying I did or didn't. What I'm saying is that I'm enforcing the terms of the easement agreement." Another long silence. "Okay. Technically, you're within your rights to require proper notice, but this is going to make you a lot of enemies." "I already have enemies, David. The HOA made sure of that when they forced this pipeline onto my property. Just be careful. They're going to come after you hard for this." Around noon on Monday, I received an official written notice via email from the utility company requesting access to the monitoring station on my property at 2 p.m. to perform emergency repairs. It was properly formatted and met the requirements of the easement agreement. At 2 p.m., I drove out to the monitoring station. The same 2 technicians from Sunday were there, along with a supervisor and Sharon Hendricks. Sharon glared at me, but didn't say anything. The supervisor approached me. "Mr. Yardley, we have your permission to access the site?" "You provided proper notice, so yes." "Thank you. This won't take long." I watched as the technicians opened the valve I'd closed. Gas started flowing again. They checked the pressure gauges, verified everything was working, and then did something I'd expected. They put a new lock on the gate, and they welded a metal cover over the valve wheel with a padlock on it. "What's that?" I asked. The supervisor looked uncomfortable. "Additional security. We can't have unauthorized people tampering with critical infrastructure. That's on my property. It's within the easement area, which gives us the right to secure it as needed for safety purposes." I took pictures of the new security measures. "I'll have my lawyer review whether that's within the scope of the easement." They finished up and left. Sharon stayed behind, walking over to where I stood by my truck. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she said. "I think I'm a property owner who's tired of being pushed around. Those families were without heat for 2 nights. There were children involved. Those families chose to live in a subdivision with incomplete utilities. Not my problem. You're a selfish, petty man. And you're a bully who uses legal tricks to get what you want. Guess we're even." Sharon's face turned red. "This isn't over. You've made an enemy of the entire Willow Creek community." "I'll survive." She stomped back to her Lexus and drove off. I went home, expecting that to be the end of it. I was wrong. Tuesday morning, I woke up to find 3 news vans parked at the end of my driveway. Apparently, someone from the HOA had contacted local media about the rancher who deliberately cut off heat to families during a cold snap. The story was all over the local news and social media. A reporter approached me as I drove out to feed the cattle. I rolled down my window. "Mr. Yardley, can you comment on the accusations that you sabotaged the Willow Creek gas pipeline?" "I didn't sabotage anything. I exercised my legal rights under the easement agreement that was forced onto my property. But families were without heat for 2 days during sub-zero temperatures. The HOA forced a pipeline onto my property against my will, fought me on fair compensation, and then expected me to give them carte blanche access without following the proper procedures. They're learning that actions have consequences." The interview was clipped and edited to make me sound like a villain, which I'd expected. Social media was brutal. I was getting called every name in the book. Someone created a Facebook group called Justice for Willow Creek Families that had 3,000 members within 24 hours. There were calls for me to be arrested, sued, run out of town. Pete called me Tuesday afternoon. "You've really stirred up a hornet's nest." "Seems like it. Was it worth it?" I thought about that. "Yeah, Pete, it was. I'm tired of people like Sharon Hendricks thinking they can do whatever they want because they have money and lawyers. Someone needed to stand up to them." "Well, you've got my support. What they did to us was wrong." Wednesday, I received a letter from the HOA's lawyer demanding I pay for all costs associated with the service interruption, including emergency hotel stays for families who claimed they couldn't safely remain in their homes without heat. The total was over $40,000. I forwarded it to David, who called me immediately. "They can demand whatever they want. They're not getting a penny. You didn't violate the easement agreement. In fact, you followed it exactly. They're saying I deliberately sabotaged their pipeline. Can they prove it? Do they have video of you closing the valve? Any witnesses? No. Then it's their word against yours. You can simply say you never touched it, or if pressed, that you were inspecting equipment on your property and adjusted what appeared to be an unsecured valve for safety reasons." Over the next week, things escalated. The HOA filed a lawsuit against me seeking damages for the service interruption. Local businesses in town were getting pressure to ban me. Someone spray-painted "Pipeline Saboteur" on my mailbox. I had to hire a security company to patrol my property after threats were made online. Through it all, I stood my ground. I gave one long interview to a local newspaper, explaining the full story. How the HOA had forced the pipeline onto my property using questionable legal tactics, how they'd fought me on fair compensation, and how I was simply enforcing the terms of the agreement they'd insisted on. The article was surprisingly balanced and generated some support for my position. Pete organized a meeting of local ranchers who were concerned about similar easement issues. 23 ranchers showed up, all of them worried that what had happened to me could happen to them. We formed a coalition to push for stronger property rights protections at the county level. The lawsuit dragged on for months. The HOA's lawyers tried to prove I'd deliberately closed the valve to cause the service interruption. My lawyer argued that even if I had adjusted the valve, I was within my rights to inspect and maintain equipment on my property, and the HOA's failure to properly secure critical infrastructure was their own fault. During discovery, something interesting came out. The utility company that installed the pipeline admitted they'd failed to lock the valve or properly secure the site after final inspection. They also admitted they hadn't conducted the required follow-up inspection within 72 hours of activation. These were violations of their own safety protocols. Armed with this information, David went on the offensive. He filed a counterclaim against both the HOA and the utility company for negligence, arguing that their failure to properly secure the pipeline had created a safety hazard on my property, and I'd been forced to take corrective action. The discovery process also revealed something else interesting. The HOA had known about the notification issues with my property and Pete's property, but had proceeded anyway, gambling that we wouldn't fight it legally. There were emails between Sharon Hendricks and the HOA's lawyer discussing the strategy of rushing the approval through before property owners could object. David brought this to the attention of the county attorney's office. The county attorney, a serious woman named Patricia Reeves, agreed to review the matter. 2 weeks later, she announced that her office was investigating whether the HOA had committed fraud in obtaining the pipeline permits. Sharon Hendricks showed up at my ranch on a Saturday morning in late February. She looked different, tired, worried, and without the aggressive confidence she'd always had before. "Can we talk?" she asked. I considered telling her to leave, but curiosity got the better of me. "Sure." We sat on my porch. Sharon was quiet for a minute, then spoke. "The county attorney is talking about criminal charges, fraud, perjury in the permit application. They're saying I personally could face charges." "You should have thought about that before you lied on government documents." I didn't think it was that serious. The lawyer said it was a normal strategy, that everyone does it. Everyone doesn't do it, and it is serious. You forced a pipeline onto people's property using fraud. Sharon looked like she might cry. "I'm going to lose everything. My position on the HOA board, maybe my house if I'm convicted. My husband is talking about divorce." Part of me felt bad for her, but a larger part remembered all the condescension, the bullying, the complete disregard for my property rights. What do you want from me, Sharon?" "I want to make this right. The HOA has authorized me to offer you additional compensation, $50,000 on top of what you already received, and we'll drop the lawsuit." "What about Pete?" "Same offer for him." "And the criminal investigation?" "That's out of my hands, but if you and the other affected property owners were willing to submit statements saying the matter has been resolved to your satisfaction, it might help." I thought about it. $85,000 total for the easement was closer to what I'd wanted in the first place, and watching Sharon face potential criminal charges, I had to admit I'd made my point. "I'll consider it, but I want something else too. A written apology from the HOA board acknowledging that the way they handled this was wrong, and it needs to be posted on the Willow Creek HOA website and sent to every homeowner." Sharon looked pained, but nodded. "I think I can make that happen. And one more thing. You step down as HOA president." "What?" "You've proven you can't be trusted with that kind of authority. You used it to bully people and break the law. Step down or no deal." Sharon sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she nodded. "Okay." We shook hands, and she left. 3 days later, I received a formal offer letter from the HOA with all the terms we'd discussed. I signed it and sent it to David for filing with the court. Pete received the same offer and accepted it. A week later, the Willow Creek HOA website posted a public apology, stating that the board had made errors in judgment in how they handled the pipeline project and apologizing to affected property owners. Sharon Hendricks announced her resignation as president. The county attorney's office reviewed everything and decided not to file criminal charges, stating that while there had been irregularities in the permit process, the matter had been resolved through civil means, and all affected parties were satisfied with the outcome. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, meaning it couldn't be refiled. Spring came to Montana, bringing warmer weather and new grass to my pastures. The torn-up ground where the pipeline had been installed was healing, and I used some of the settlement money to reseed and improve the pasture. Pete came by one afternoon with a six-pack of beer, and we sat on my porch watching the sun set over the mountains. "You hear Sharon and her husband did end up divorcing?" Pete said. "I heard. I also heard she moved to Idaho. New HOA president is a retired school teacher named Mike. Seems like a reasonable guy. He already sent out a letter to all the neighbors apologizing for the problems and promising better communication going forward." "That's good." Pete took a sip of his beer. "You ever regret it? Closing that valve, I mean. It caused you a lot of trouble." I thought about it. No, someone needed to stand up to them. They thought they could do whatever they wanted, and they needed to learn they couldn't. "You became pretty infamous. People still talk about it." "Let them talk. I did what I had to do to protect my property and my rights." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. My cattle grazed peacefully in the pasture, and somewhere under that ground ran a pipeline carrying gas to 43 houses in a subdivision down the road. The pipeline was still there, the easement was still there, but at least I'd gotten fair compensation for it and made sure that HOA would think twice before trying to steamroll someone again. The next year brought changes. The state legislature, hearing about what had happened with the Willow Creek pipeline, passed new laws strengthening property owner rights in easement cases and requiring more thorough notification processes. Several legislators actually reached out to me and Pete during the drafting process to get our input. I testified at a hearing in Helena, explaining what had happened and why stronger protections were needed. The bill passed with bipartisan support and was signed into law by the governor. It became known informally as the Yardley Amendment, which made me uncomfortable but also proud that something good had come from the whole mess. My ranch settled back into its normal routine. The media attention faded, the news vans stopped showing up, and life returned to the peaceful existence I'd always wanted out here. I expanded my herd, improved my fencing, and even started dating a veterinarian named Sarah Hartford who thought the whole pipeline story was hilarious. Pete and I remained close friends, united by our shared experience. We'd occasionally drive past the Willow Creek entrance and shake our heads at the fancy houses, but mostly we just focused on our own properties and our own lives. 2 years after the pipeline incident, I was at the feed store in town when a woman approached me. She was in her 30s, nicely dressed, and looked vaguely familiar. "Mr. Yardley? I'm Jennifer Matthews. I live in Willow Creek." I tensed, expecting another confrontation, but her expression was friendly. "I just wanted to say thank you," she continued. "What you did, standing up to Sharon and the old HOA board, it made a real difference. They'd been running the subdivision like dictators, fining people for stupid things, making unilateral decisions without input. After everything that happened with the pipeline, there was a complete turnover of the board. The new leadership actually listens to homeowners and works with us instead of against us. So, thank you." I was surprised and touched. "You're welcome. I'm glad something good came out of it. My husband and I bought our house 2 years ago, right before all this happened. We almost moved because of how awful the HOA was. Now it's actually a nice place to live." We chatted for a few more minutes, and then she went on her way. That encounter stayed with me. I'd been focused on my own property rights and my anger at being pushed around, but I hadn't really thought about the ripple effects. Apparently, forcing accountability on the HOA had improved life for the people who actually lived there. The following winter was harsh, with multiple storms dropping several feet of snow and temperatures staying below zero for weeks. The pipeline that had caused so much trouble worked flawlessly, keeping those 43 houses warm through the brutal cold. I had to admit, as much as I'd hated the circumstances of its installation, it was better than having 43 families relying on propane in that weather. My relationship with Sarah got serious, and she moved into the ranch house. She was fascinated by the whole pipeline saga and liked to joke that she was dating a local legend. We'd sit on the porch in the evenings, and she'd ask me questions about it. "Do you think you'd do it again?" she asked one night. "Close the valve, knowing all the trouble it caused?" I considered the question carefully. Yeah, I would. Not because I wanted people to be cold or to cause trouble for its own sake. but because sometimes you have to make a stand. Sharon and that HOA thought they could do whatever they wanted, and if I hadn't pushed back, they would have kept doing it to other people. The rancher who capped the pipeline, Sarah said with a slight grin. My hero. Don't start with that. Too late. You're stuck with it. Life continued its steady rhythm. The pasture where the pipeline ran was fully recovered, and you couldn't even tell there'd been construction unless you knew exactly where to look. The pipeline itself was invisible, buried under 4 feet of Montana soil, quietly doing its job. I'd occasionally see people from Willow Creek around town, at the grocery store or the hardware store. Most ignored me, some gave me dirty looks, but increasingly, people would nod politely or even say hello. The story had become part of local lore, the details getting exaggerated with each retelling, but the core truth remained. I'd stood up for my property rights, and I'd won. 3 years after the incident, I got a call from a property rights organization based in Denver. They were putting together a conference on eminent domain abuse and wanted me to speak. I agreed, figuring my experience might help other people facing similar situations. The conference was in Colorado Springs, and about 200 people attended. I told the story of the pipeline, the legal battles, and the eventual resolution. I emphasized the importance of knowing your rights, getting good legal counsel, and not being afraid to stand up to powerful interests. After my talk, dozens of people came up to share their own stories of easement abuse, eminent domain overreach, and HOA problems. I realized that what had happened to me wasn't unique. It was happening all over the country, and most people felt powerless to stop it. I exchanged contact information with several attendees and kept in touch with them over the following months. A few even called me for advice when they faced their own property rights battles. I wasn't a lawyer, but I could share my experience and point them toward resources that might help. Back home, the ranch continued to thrive. Sarah and I got married in a small ceremony on the property, with Pete as my best man. We talked about starting a family, maybe raising kids on the ranch the way my parents had raised me. The Willow Creek subdivision continued to grow. They added another phase of development, bringing the total number of houses to 75. The new phase didn't require any additional easements through my property, thankfully, and the new HOA board made sure to communicate with neighboring property owners throughout the planning process. Mike, the new HOA president, even stopped by my ranch to introduce himself and assure me that they'd learned from past mistakes. He seemed genuine, and I appreciated the gesture. We didn't become friends exactly, but we had a cordial relationship, which was more than I'd ever had with Sharon. I heard through the grapevine that Sharon had remarried and was living in Boise, working as a real estate agent. I bore her no ill will at that point. She'd faced consequences for her actions, and hopefully, she'd learned from them. 5 years after the pipeline incident, I was out riding fence line on horseback when I came across the monitoring station where I'd closed the valve that night. The security fencing was still there, a bit weathered now, with the equipment inside humming quietly. I sat on my horse for a while, thinking about everything that had happened. That single act of closing a valve had changed my life in ways I never could have predicted. It had cost me money, caused enormous stress, made me temporarily infamous, and forced me to fight battles I'd never wanted to fight. But it had also resulted in new laws to protect property owners, brought accountability to an out-of-control HOA, helped other people facing similar situations, and taught me that standing up for what's right matters even when it's hard. I'd protected my land, stood my ground, and made a difference. As I rode back toward the ranch house where my wife was waiting, I felt at peace with all of it. The pipeline was still there, running under my pasture, but it no longer felt like an intrusion. It was just part of the landscape now, part of the story of my ranch and my life. The sunset painted the Montana sky in brilliant shades of orange and red as I unsaddled my horse and headed inside. Sarah had dinner ready, and we ate together, talking about our day and making plans for the future. The pipeline saga was history now, just a story we'd tell our eventual children about the time their father took on an HOA and won. And every winter, when those 43 houses in Willow Creek stayed warm through Montana's brutal cold, heated by gas flowing through a pipeline under my ranch, I'd think about that night I closed the valve. It had been petty, maybe, and certainly risky, but it had also been necessary. Sometimes you have to show bullies that you won't be pushed around, that there are consequences for trying to steamroll over people. The land around me was quiet now, peaceful in the fading light. This was my home, my property, my piece of Montana. I'd fought for it, protected it, and ensured that my rights as a landowner were respected. The fight had been exhausting and expensive, but looking out at my ranch, at the life Sarah and I were building here, I knew it had been worth every moment. The pipeline was there, underground and out of sight. The easement was recorded in the county records, but I'd made sure that it happened on fair terms, and I'd made sure that the HOA learned they couldn't just take what they wanted without consequences. In the end, that was all I'd really wanted. Respect for my property, fair compensation, and accountability for those who'd tried to abuse their power. As night fell over the ranch, I stood on my porch one last time, looking out at the land I loved. Somewhere under that ground, gas flowed through a pipeline that had caused so much trouble, keeping people warm and comfortable. I'd made my peace with it. The battle was over, the war was won, and life went on. Tomorrow I'd be up early to feed cattle, fix fence, and do all the other tasks that made up ranching life. But tonight, I was just a man standing on his porch, looking at his land, knowing he'd stood his ground when it mattered. The pipeline was there. The HOA had learned its lesson, and I'd protected what was mine. In the end, that was all I could ask for. The story of the rancher who capped the pipeline would be told around town for years to come, details growing more dramatic with each retelling. But I knew the truth of it. I'd simply been a man who'd had enough of being pushed around and decided to push back. Nothing more, nothing less. And if I had to do it all over again, knowing everything that would happen, I'd still walk out to that monitoring station on that cold November night and turn that valve. Because some principles are worth fighting for, and property rights are one of them. The land beneath my feet had been here long before the pipeline, long before the subdivision, long before the HOA. And it would be here long after all of us were gone. I was just its temporary steward, responsible for protecting it during my time here. I'd done that job, and I'd done it well.